an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Lirael, chapters 21 through 25. In these chapters, Lirael comes across something that has been left there for her to find thousands of years earlier. That feels like a pretty big fucking deal. And then Sameth gets some news about a friend of his that isn't great and gives him some pause, and then he decides to drop everything and handle it. On the one hand, dude. On the other hand, reading about him at home has been terrible, so kind of glad. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Abbey for commissioning this episode, and I'm sorry, Abbey, for the confusion last week, in which I announced that another Lirael was about to start, and it turns out that I was wrong, and it was supposed to be The Magician's Apprentice. My bad. Last week was bad. Bad week, guys. Oh my god. What a mess I've been. So, this episode, or these chapters, rather, Lirael finally gets some direction, and I'm really glad because I felt sort of bad for her. Like, it's one thing on the sidelines for us as readers to know that there's more to her, obviously, than she knows. But it's quite another to read the years passing in which she isn't aware of that. You know, it's very different to come into a story right before somebody finds out. You know, Harry Potter, it's like 4 chapters, and they're very short chapters. And then he's told he's a wizard, and we're done. And he's probably, from when we first see him to when he finds out, is the passage of maybe a week. And in this, we first meet Lirael when she's like, 14? And now she's like 17? It's been a minute. And while it doesn't feel like it's that long for me as a reader, knowing that she has had to endure years and years of just constant disappointment and not being part of things around her is excruciating. And I feel so bad for her. So hopefully this helps cement, because a part of my problem with Sabriel, and I said this in the finale episode, was that I didn't know Sabriel before everything starts to pop off. So when things circle back around and we go back to her, her school, see old friends, we didn't get to know any of her old friends. We didn't get to see anything about what she was like as a person during a non-crisis situation. And it's really interesting and I think smart that he has decided to write this with a lot more time before things begin to change for her, so that we get to know her a little bit better. We get to realize how alone she feels. And, it's remarkable to think about having been with her as readers inside her head and knowing how intelligent and daring she is and knowing how much she pines to be a part of things. But then reading about how, from the outside, everyone else thinks that she is almost basically mute. They know she can talk, but she almost never does, because she feels so acutely that she is not one of them, that she'd rather hold herself at a distance than let herself, get fooled into a camaraderie that in her mind isn't real. Lirael is so wrapped up in the idea of being a Claire as the end-all be-all of accomplishing something that other people can relate to, that she doesn't even think there's a possibility that anybody would be able to be friends with her if they were a Claire and she isn't. it's really honestly kind of sad that that's the only perspective she has, is wanting to go and chat, but knowing that she won't be able to contribute in that way. As far as she is concerned, that's it, folks. And I'm just like, there's so much more that you could bring to a conversation, though, Lirael. Like, just because you can't see the future, just because you can't do what they do, you work in the library and have encountered some really wild stuff. Or you have, there's also, like, I don't know, there's just a lot that, as a person, she's just really intelligent and could have some things to say. I just wish that more people in the world understood that just because you don't have the exact same point of reference as others, not only does that not mean that you don't have anything to bring to the table, it means almost sometimes that you are going to be more valuable in a conversation because you bring a perspective that absolutely nobody else is bringing. And it's a shame that she doesn't see that, and that nobody has seemed to reach out in a way that is meaningful, because we have other people in authority around her, and they try and reassure her as far as like, oh, it took us so long to get ours, to, just being 14, that's not terrible. Like, one of us was 17 by the time we got it, et cetera, et cetera. They just try and reassure her basically that eventually you'll fit in, rather than being like, you can fit in whether you know this stuff or not. And I feel like that's really the thing is I wish there was more media out there that emphasized that. Emphasize the feeling of bringing something new, rather than having to fit into a place that isn't really you, So anyway, sorry, there's a whole bunch of conversation here. Abby's saying, we definitely get a lot more characterization in this one. The muteness is one of the reasons I connect with her so strongly. Not as much as her, but I have had that in public where I just couldn't answer when someone spoke to me. Laura says, as an autistic person, it's refreshing to see a character who struggles with that apartness and yet has plenty to offer. It's very like having autism and feeling like you don't belong. That's really interesting. That makes sense. Yeah, it's just, it's difficult to see somebody that and I've had friends like this as well, who really undervalued themselves, and I couldn't understand it because I could see so clearly how interesting they were and how funny they were. And when they were around anyone else, it was like they completely shut down, and all of that went into hiding. And to a degree, I know it seems unlikely based on how much I'm like out here performing, but I can be like that when I'm in crowds where I'm not comfortable. I just sort of shut down. So I have started to have more sympathy for that response. But it's really, I don't know. It's hard to read her going through this for such a long time and only having this dog to talk to, especially when that dog is clearly aware that there is something else happening. I feel like there's something about that as well that makes me feel like a little betrayed, that the one quote friend that she has is also keeping things from her. It's like, I'm glad that she has somebody, but I'm also really like not excited about the fact that the dog is like leading her down this path and not telling her the truth about everything. And there may be a point where it becomes really clear why the dog couldn't tell her. But at this point, I feel a bit of a way about it nudging and shoving her down this one path of action and pretending that it's just by accident coming across this stuff. It's like, So anyway, she has reached this door, and she gets examined by a charter sending here. And there is, well, I think actually that was the last chapter, right? But she goes through and finds this like room, and this is so wild. The door at the far end of the bridge opened as soon as Lirael touched it. Once again, she felt charter magic flow into her, but it was not the friendly touch of the upper door or the quiet recognition of the stone portal at the entrance to the rift. This one was more like a wary examination, followed by immediate but not necessarily friendly recognition. And she feels free magic as she's going in and really resists the urge to step through because of that. But the dog pushes her through. And the moment that she does, the door slams shut. And it says, "It was darker than any darkness Lirael had ever known, a true dark in which it was suddenly difficult to even imagine light. The darkness pressed upon Lirael, making her doubt her own senses. Only the dog's warm skin under her hand told her that she was still standing, that the room had not changed, and the floor had not tilted. "Don't move," whispered the dog, and Lirael felt a canine snout briefly press against her leg, as if the spoken warning weren't enough. The smell of free magic grew stronger. Lirael pinched her nose with one hand, trying not to breathe anything in, while her other hand went to the clockwork emergency mouse in her waistcoat pocket. Not that it was likely that even this clever device could find its way from here to the library. So she can feel charter magic as well, and she said, like, it's described as being like in the air like pollen, and later on that's exactly what it looks like. It's floating through the air like dandelion clocks, as it's called, which is a familiar sight to many of us who live in areas where they have those like cottonwood trees. And they are all spells that are like concentrated around this like central spot in the room. And it's an octagonal room. And she had thought it was just going to be this like stone chamber, you know, almost a cave. And instead, it's beautiful. There is a like pattern on the walls of golden stars, towers, and silver keys, which the keys are one of the symbols of the Abhorsen, right? The ceiling was plastered and painted with a night sky, full of black, rain-fat clouds advancing upon 7 bright and shining stars. And there was a carpet under her bare feet, a deep blue carpet, soft and warm under her toes after the cold, wet stone of the bridge. So there's a table in the middle of the room, and that's where all of the magic is sort of concentrated around it. And the dog is like, "So, there it is." And she's like, What do you mean?" And the dog is like, "What do you mean, what do I mean? We went through like a bunch of different tests, and every step of the way, things let you through. The guardian didn't destroy you. The doors opened for you. The path lit up for you. That is obviously for you. This place literally had your name on it. Like, I don't really know what fucking more you need, but I'm going to go take a nap, and you figure your shit out because you're dense as fuck, and I'm starting to get irritated," which I was cracking up, to be honest. And she's like, "But what if something bad happens?" The dog's like, "Then wake me up, you dumb bitch. Oh my God. Like, do I have to tell you how to do everything?" So finally, she looks at the stuff on the table, and she's thinking about all of the shit that she has discovered in the library that is very dangerous. And one of the things is mechanical traps, charter spells that had unraveled and become unpredictable, even poisoned book bindings. Y'all, what's the point of that? Why you got a poisoned book binding? What are you doing? Like, just feels really, you know. So whatever magic was concentrated here was very old too, Lirael realized. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the carpet, the table, even the air in the room were saturated with layer upon layer of charter marks, some of them at least 1,000 years old. She could feel them moving everywhere, mixing and changing. When she closed her eyes for a moment, the room felt almost like a charter stone, a source of charter magic rather than just a place upon which many spells had been cast. But that was impossible, at least as far as she knew. Well, that's interesting. Is there a source here? What's that about? Curious. So finally, the magic seems to like sense her and reaches out and sort of reels her in as if she's taking too goddamn long and they're getting impatient here. It's like the dog has practically commiserated with the magic in the room and been like, can you believe her? We are fucking standing here. She's standing in the middle of the room staring. Will you just take her over there so we can get this started? Jesus. And she gets pulled over the table and she looks at this book called The Book of Remembrance and Forgetting. And what I think is happening here is that there is something that she was made to forget, or maybe her mother was made to forget. I don't know. That this book is helping her to remember, but I don't know about that because I feel like if that had been the case, if she had just had something sort of removed from her mind, there would be more alluding to that fact in her point of views, like that there would be blank spaces in her memory, or I don't know. And that doesn't seem to be the case. So that was the only like theory that I had, but who knows? And she is open, and part of the reason why I thought that too was when she opens the book, it says, marks chase each other across the silver surface and deep in the metal itself, marks of binding and closing, burning and destruction. And I kind of was like thinking that maybe that was the burning and destruction of like a spell that had been put on her to make her forget. But I think what those are is actually meant to like burn up the book in case she is not supposed to be the one opening it. Like if she were somebody else, this would fuck the book up. So she opens the book and it says, there were charter marks inside the page put there at the time of the paper's making, and free magic constrained and channeled into place. Magic of both kinds lay in the boards and leather of the cover, and even in the glue and stitching of the spine. Most of all, there was magic and power in the type. In the past, Lirael had seen similar, if less powerful books, like In the Skin of a Lion. You could never truly finish reading such a book, for the contents changed at need, at the original maker's whim, or to suit the phases of the moon, or the patterns of the weather. Some of the books had contents you couldn't even remember till certain events might come to pass. Invariably, this was an act of kindness from the creator of the book, for such contents invariably dealt with things that would be a burden to recall with every waking day. Which, man, do you wish that you could fucking do that, guys? Because I do. I would love to be able to, like, forget the world's a fucking trash fire until I needed to know it for whatever reason. That'd be great. I would like to activate that spell, please. So she sits down and begins to read, and behind her, the dog is just asleep. And it says, hours later, or even days, for Lirael had lost all knowledge of time, she turned what seemed to be the last page and closed the book. It latched itself shut, the silver clasp snapping. And then she picks up these panpipes that are sitting there, which I assume are flute versions of the bells. I don't know that for sure, but it feels like it makes sense. And that does seem like a much more practical way of carrying them around. Like, honestly, a bandolier of bells, when bells, like a bandolier, they're literally hanging off, and bells are rung by being hanged and shaken. A bandolier of bells feels like a bad idea. I've been thinking that. It's very, like, it's a cool mechanism, but it just seems incredibly cumbersome to me. And low-key, these panpipes, I want to be the bells, like, or equivalent, simply because I want there to be another way to do this. It just feels cumbersome. And And because each of the names of them, when she touches them, there's a name for each of them. That's part of what makes me think that as well. So she opens this box, that's the last thing, and it says one side was silver, but the other side was something she couldn't describe. Where the bright reflective surface of a mirror would be, there was a non-reflective rectangle of nothing, a piece of absolute darkness, a shape of something made from the total absence of light. The Book of Remembrance and Forgetting called it a dark mirror, and Lirael had read, at least in part, how it might be used, but the dark mirror would not work in this room, or in any part of the world of life. It could only be used in death, and Lirael had no intention of going there, even if the book professed to show her how to come back. Death was the province of the Abhorsen, not the Clare, even though the peculiar use of the dark mirror could possibly be related to the Clare's gift of sight. So, I don't know if Lirael is supposed to be if she's supposed to be being given this gift as a means of, like, supplementing what the Abhorsens do, or if she herself is an Abhorsen, but that was what I assumed. I figured, especially because of her appearance being so different from everybody else's, that she came from the Abhorsen bloodline, and just, you know, the fact that she's saying here, death was the province of the Abhorsen, not the Clare, and that she definitely would never be going into death, that kind of, like, threw water on the idea to me that she had been given memories back by reading that book, which is really what I thought. I thought that we were going to find out here that she was an Abhorsen in some way. And then that line basically did away with that completely. So she snaps it shut, puts it into her pocket. She takes the panpipes, puts them in her right pocket, and takes the book and tucks it into the front of her waistcoat. And then she walks back to the dog. And it says, I'm trying to find the spot too. Oh, here it is. It was time for the two of them to have a very serious talk about what was going on. Yeah, you think? Clearly. The book, the dark mirror, and the panpipes had lain here for 1,000 years or more, waiting in the dark for someone of the Clare of long ago had known would come, waiting in the dark for a woman named Lirael, waiting for her. So I am going to assume that this dog was put here to lead her to this thing when the time came. I am dying to know how they knew that she was going to find the dog statue, because it was hidden in a room with a fucking stilker. So it feels like this is a setup, and that stilker was some sort of test. I don't know. But it feels like this is all a setup to me. But that's pretty much the last of her that we see in this section, because the next couple of chapters we are with Prince Sameth the whole time. Prince Sameth is just fucking miserable. It's weird. It's like there's a part of him that feels to me that is sort of suffering from some kind of PTSD, and nobody seems to really understand what it was that he went through or how traumatizing it is. His sister, whom I think is presented as being intelligent and observant, does not seem to see what he's going through. Like, you know, when the book that he is supposed to be studying from arrives and he has the reaction that he does where he starts to, like, violently tremble, I don't feel like she puts forth the effort she should to figure out what exactly is going on there. And I understand that this is set up to be that, you know, he is the one with, like, Abhorsen abilities, and she is the one with governing abilities. And she doesn't really understand what's going on with the Book of the Dead, which is part of why she didn't get the book sent to her. But I really wish that she had been a little bit more compassionate and like, had him looked at by somebody, because the way he responded wasn't normal. And it's hard for me to trust what I'm being told about her being like a good leader who is observant if she can't see this about somebody that's family, you know? But that's the way it goes sometimes, because when you suffer through this sort of thing, and I don't mean this sort of thing like, you know, going into death. I just mean like when you are dealing with a trauma, it's really difficult to open yourself up to talking about it with somebody. Even people that you trust, it's really difficult. And if you don't trust somebody totally, which he clearly doesn't trust his sister totally, it's next to impossible. Never mind the fact that Sameth doesn't seem to have the vocabulary to describe what he's going through. So he keeps on sort of getting angry at himself for being so withdrawn and for ruining things. But he doesn't, like, if he were actually to cope with the root issue, this probably would go better for him. But he doesn't do that because he doesn't know that's what this is all stemming from, right? He's very much like Harry in the 5th book, where he's just like kind of feeling like nobody gets it. And he's not wrong. So he was standing on the sentry walk for 2 reasons. The first was that he wanted to look out in the hope that he would see his father or mother returning. The second was that he wanted to avoid Elamir and everyone else who wanted to organize his life. And Sam is thinking about the fact that his parents were constantly away, and that he really, while they're gone, should be taking advantage of this time to be studying the Book of the Dead, and that he hasn't even opened it since Elamir had given it to him. Every time that he thinks about it, he sort of shrinks away from just the thought. And instead it says he wrote speech after speech in which he tried to explain his feelings and fears. Letters to Sabriel, letters to Touchstone, letters to both parents. All of them ended up in the fire. And he's thinking that he should just tell his mom. And then he says, no, I'll tell Dad, and then he can tell her. And I'm just like, oh, Sam, buddy, dude, you need to be able to have a fucking conversation. Just having your dad play the go-between, especially regarding something like this that he has no fucking experience with. He's not an Abhorsen. What you're going through is specific to what happened in death. Don't try to talk to him about it. Talk to your mother who knows what the fuck. So they're both away and they've been gone a minute. And at one point this guard comes up. And this guard becomes a sort of weird side friend to Sam. He's not somebody that we know much about. Nothing has gone down that the guard has been involved in. But as of right now, he is the one person who makes any sort of attempt to chat with Sam in a way that's not accusing him, or at least in the way that Sam thinks of it being accusing. And the guy said something about how, you don't want to break a leg. And Sam takes this as kind of an insult because the guards all seem to be very eager to watch him do the dance for the Bird of Dawning ceremony because it's going to be humiliating. And he's just, as it turns out, he does not do well. His fears are totally founded, which I appreciate. It's really easy to write a character who is very unsure of themselves and just can't imagine doing this thing. And then they get up on stage and everything goes really well and they're wonderful and it all just works out. But rather than that, this author has been he's really worried about it because he's not into it. And guess what? He does bad and almost kills somebody practically by falling on them. Any amount of, it's one of those things that that for the rest of his life, he's going to occasionally have moments of vivid memory of doing this dance and his whole self is going to cringe from it. We all have memories like that, right? Where we just said or did something really stupid or thoughtless, maybe even hurtful without even thinking, and we still look back decades later and we're like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I feel so bad. Or just like, having just done something embarrassing, tripping in front of a bunch of people or whatever. And I feel like this is 100% going in that category for him. Nor did he show up well at perspective. Elamir always threw herself into the task at hand, working like fury. Sam did quite the reverse, staring into space and worrying about his clouded future, often becoming so engrossed that he stopped doing whatever he was supposed to be doing. "Sir, are you all right?" the guard repeated. "Yes, thank you. Slipped. Hit my funny bone." "See anything interesting out there?" asked the guard. "No," replied Sam. He looked out again, down into the interior of the city. The Midwinter Festival was to start in a few days. Construction of the Frost Fair was in full swing. A great bustling tent town on the frozen surfaces of Lake Loisere, the Frost Fair had pageant wagons and players, jesters and jugglers, musicians and magicians, exhibitions and expositions, and all sorts of games, not to mention food from every corner of the Old Kingdom and beyond. Lake Loisere covered 90 acres of Belisair's central valley, but the Frost Fair overflowed it, extending into the public gardens that lined the lake shore. Sam had always liked the Frost Fair, but he looked down on it now without interest. All he could feel was a cold and black depression. Okay, so, guys, let's talk about this, because this is like the number one indicator that you are experiencing depression, is when shit that you used to love, things that you normally are very excited about, do not interest you at all. And the fact that Sam is feeling this way, I wish so much that he had the knowledge to understand how significant that is and what a problem that is. Laura says, "I feel like what Touchstone said about a part of his spirit being hurt or gone is a very good comparison to PTSD. Ooh, that's a good point. He's weaker and unable to deal with what's happened to him." Yeah, that's a good way to say it. There really is, when you're depressed, it feels like part of you is gone. And it's not even like it's gone, like gone. What's so awful is that it's still there, but it's like it's locked in another room and you can't get to it. And you can't even get up the energy to try to get to it. It's not even that you're desperately trying to get it back and fighting, and it's not. When you're really depressed, fighting isn't really on the menu. That requires passion. That requires a sort of a focus and an energy that is the opposite of what depression is. And it's a really difficult thing to communicate to people who have not experienced, because from the outside, people are like, just get up and do something. And you're like, oh my God, I am saying that to myself literally all day, every day when I experience depression. It is just an internal monologue of, what the fuck is wrong with you? Get up, just fucking do the thing. What is the matter with you? Why are you doing this? If you just do it, it would be fine. Why are you being so lazy? Why aren't you just fucking getting it done? And the people who approach depression in that way have no idea that they're not telling us anything that we don't already think to ourselves every fucking second, And so I shared this on my Facebook yesterday, or a couple days ago. I have been having an uptick as the show grows of people who message me telling me that whatever podcast they listen to has helped get them through a hard time, especially regarding depression. And as somebody who also suffers from depression, the idea that I'm able to to do absolutely anything for other people who are experiencing it is pretty much everything that I ever wanted. I know that I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing. If you are somebody who subscribes to the idea that we have destinies, or that we have a path that we are supposed to be on, there is no more affirmation I can think of than hearing from people that I'm helping them in that way. And the message that I just got from somebody yesterday was fucking fly interrupting my emotional moment that I just got from somebody yesterday was just so, it was worded in such a way, and I'm going to read this. It says, I felt the need to thank you today because this podcast got me through the hardest phase of depression I ever had. You two got me through and out of this state of mind by simply being you and doing this show. I feel so much better now. Your reading of the chapters made the emotions come back to me. You crying when Dobby died made me cry for the first time in a long time because before I had felt just nothing at all. The world is colorful again, and for the most part, it's because of you. Look, somebody telling me something like that, the world is colorful again, like, I just, like, got that message, just cried for, like, 5 minutes. It doesn't really get better than that. And Sam is in that place, right? Where there's no color. That's the worst. Like, I just really feel for him, you know? That simultaneous, I cannot force myself to be better, but I am fully aware of how shitty I'm being is absolute hell. And I feel like it happens for teenagers especially a great deal. And we as adults do not have a lot of sympathy for it the way that we should, because almost all of us have gone through it. And we just conveniently act like that didn't happen, or we behave as if that was just like not valid, as if growing up and knowing better now means that what we experienced then wasn't real. And that's not how it works. What we're going through when we're teenagers is what we're going through. That's what we are living, and that is real. And I distinctly remember a couple of occasions of being with my parents and not being able to muster enthusiasm for things that they had done for me, trying to cheer me up, actively trying to cheer me up because they could tell something was wrong, and feeling so bad because I could not give a shit. And hearing my mom on the phone afterwards talking to somebody about how, like, we were in fucking Manhattan looking at all this cool stuff and I barely cracked a smile all day, and feeling really terrible about it because she wasn't wrong, but there was nothing I could do because I didn't understand what it was. And it's very easy to write it off as sullenness. That's just like, oh, you know how teenagers are. Teenagers are going through these insane changes that cause all kinds of hormonal shifts. And we use this word hormones like it's just a sort of like laughable throwaway, well, you know. Hormones are what runs shit in our bodies, y'all. Like, that is serious. When those get fucked up, everything is wrong. So to act as if it's just sort of like, oh, well, you know, it's temporary, whatever. Whether it's temporary is irrelevant. You know what's permanent? Suicide. So maybe we should take temporary shit a little bit more seriously because it could lead to something permanent. So this whole thing with him is just so, like, tough to read because I get so frustrated with him and then I feel angry for being frustrated, and it puts me right back in the place that I was when I was feeling that frustration towards myself. So let's see. Abby is saying, for what it's worth, I feel like you create a safe space here and I can relax as much as I ever can when I'm listening to your podcast. Thank you, Abby, for that. Crying. Laura says, we act as if it wasn't as impactful because our perspective changes. We forget how powerful it felt at the time. Exactly. Like, you know, when you're older and you go through depression, and that depression leads to you not being able to go to work, and so you can't pay your bills, and so your electricity is going to get shut off, or you're going to lose your house. It's easy to look back at your depression as a teenager and be like, what the fuck? I was fine somebody cooked for me, somebody did my laundry, somebody whatever. Why was I even complaining? And it's like, no, you were feeling the same way though. Whether the consequences were as severe is not the thing. It's about how you felt. So yeah. Now he says, for years I thought I was just being a drama queen when I was a teenager, and now, nope, I was really fucking miserable and depressed. Exactly. And I got called a drama queen, for sure. And it was like one of those moments when I remember my mom called me that. My mom suffers from depression too, but I don't think she understood seeing it from the outside. That's what was going on. And she called me a drama queen. And I remember saying, wow, I wonder where I learned that from. And as it came out of my mouth, my brain was going, oh, damn, like, you really just going to say it? And I remember my mom's expression just being kind of like really shocked. Like, it was one of those moments where both of us just sort of stopped talking and stared at each other. And finally I was just like, I'm out. And I like, I don't know, went for a walk or something. But there was nothing really to be said, because me saying that sort of like, she realized a little bit that this was something more than what she was trying to make it, but she didn't realize quite enough. You know, it's hard. Being a parent is like really, really tough anyway. And dealing with this sort of stuff, especially back then, now I feel like there's a lot more available because of the internet to educate yourself on what this looks like and how to cope. But when I was growing up, it was just not really talked about. And I feel like mental health had a lot more of a stigma. It still definitely has a stigma, but it's something that more people are free to sort of open up about lately and see that they are not alone in this, or talking about like the actual chemical reasons that we need to be on certain medications, because being on a medication was stigmatized a ton and still is for a lot of people. So yeah, it's just, Sam is just struggling really, it's this ongoing battle every day for him to just make himself go through the motions. And the only thing that is giving him any sort of like calm is being in his workshop and creating the little things that he makes. So Brel was wrong about the bad rehearsals meaning a successful dance. Sam bumbled and stumbled all his way through it, and only the professionalism and energy of the six spirits saved the dance from disaster. Traditionally, all the dancers from the festival ate with the royal family at the palace after the dance, but Sam chose to stay away. They'd done enough to him, and he'd done enough, with the bruises to show for it. He was sure Sleet had deliberately smacked him with her stilt near the end. She was the sister of the one he'd knocked off her stilts in rehearsal. So he was left in peace, but not the next day or the days following. Elamir couldn't, or wouldn't, see that Sam's sullenness came from genuine trouble. So she simply made up more things for him to do. Even worse, she started foisting the younger sisters of her own friends on him, clearly thinking that a good woman could sort out whatever was wrong with him. Naturally, Sam took an instant dislike to anyone Elamir so obviously seated next to him at dinner, or just happened to drop by his workroom with a broken bracelet catch to be mended. His constant worry about the book and his mother's return left him little energy to pursue friendships, let alone romantic attachments. So he earned the reputation of being stiff and distant, not only among the young women introduced to him by Elamir, but to everyone of his own age around the palace. Even people who had been his friends in previous years when he was home for the holidays found that they no longer enjoyed his company. Sam, caught up in his own troubles and busy with his official duties, hardly noticed that people of his own age avoided him. And the only person that he really talks to is Brel up on the ramparts. And poor Sam, his birthday basically he's got like a birthday that's like 2 days after Christmas, essentially. Because it happens just after the Midwinter Festival, there's this huge event and party that sort of takes the place in some ways of him getting to have like a big birthday party. And normally that's something that bothers him more than it does this year. Because he just doesn't want to be participating in anything anyway. And he gets gifts from his mother and father. One of them is a surcoat with the Abhorsen, like, silver keys all, like, patterned all over it. And the other one is a book called Merchain on the Binding of Free Magical Elementals. And it's just all stuff reminding him what he should be spending his time doing and isn't doing. And Brel says, well, maybe your sister will get you something good. And Sam's like, no, I doubt it. And that sort of ends their conversation. He's just turned 17. He goes downstairs. This guy's... Tell me that this doesn't sound so tough to sit through. Elamir did organize a birthday feast in the Great Hall, but it was a lackluster affair, mainly due to Sam's depressing influence. He refused to dance because it was the one day when he could refuse, and since it was his birthday, that meant no one else could dance either. He refused to open his presents in front of everyone because he didn't feel like it, and he merely toyed with the grilled swordfish with lime and buttered small wheat that had once been his favorite dish. In fact, he acted like a spoiled and sulky brat of 7 rather than like a young man of 17. Sam knew it, but felt unable to stop. It was the first time in weeks that he'd been able to refuse Elamir's orders, or as she called them, strong suggestions. The feast ended early with everyone cross and short-tempered. Sam went straight to his workroom, ignoring the whispers and sidelong looks as he left the hall. He didn't care what everyone thought, though he was uncomfortably aware of Jal Oren's hooded eyes watching his exit. Jal would certainly report on Sam's shortcomings when his parents returned, if he didn't decide before then to deliver one of his justly feared summations of exactly what was wrong with Sam's behavior. So, I'm wondering about that, because we don't really hear about what's going on with, like, Jal. We don't, his parents come home, and I wonder if Jal isn't sort of putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that something happened to Sam and that it must be related to this. And he goes back to his room and he tries to open the Book of the Dead, and that fucking shaking happens again and he can't do it. So, it's not like he's not making an effort to overcome his fears. It's not just about fear. There's like a fucking physical reaction happening. So he gets a letter from Nick that cheers him up a little bit. Nick is going to be visiting. And I love this because it didn't even occur to me. It says rather the remains of a letter because it had been written on machine-made paper. Like most products of Ancestieran technology, the paper had begun to fail upon crossing the wall, and it was now crumbling into its component fibers. Sam had often told Nick in the past to use handmade paper, but he never did. And that winds up happening later. Like, he gets another letter from Nick, and he literally has to, like, take the pieces and, like, figure out and tape it together in order to be able to read it. He immediately consulted his almanac to see what Midwinter and Ancestier would correspond with in the Old Kingdom. And there's a note about how this almanac that he has they're pretty rare, and the fact that he got one for his birthday was like a big deal when he was 12 years old. So that makes him feel a little bit better that he's like going to be able to see his friend and somebody that's like was there for the shit that went down. He doesn't know the extent of it, but I'm sure that's helpful, is realizing that he's going to be around somebody who at least has a bit of a frame of reference for what he has experienced. There was other news that troubled Sam. One letter from his father reminded him too much of the terrible day on the perimeter where the dead Sutherlings had attacked his cricket team. The Ancestieran army, presumably under instructions from the government, has allowed a group of Sutherling volunteers to enter the Old Kingdom at one of the old crossing points on the wall, in contravention of all past agreements and common sense. Obviously, Corallini has gained further support, and this is a test of his plan to send all the Sutherlings into the kingdom. I have put a stop to further crossings as best I can, and reinforced the guards at Baderin, but there is no guarantee that the Ancestarians will not send more Sutherlings across, though General Tyndall has said he will delay acting on any such orders and warn us if he can. In any case, more than 1,000 Sutherlings have already crossed, and they are at least 4 days ahead of us. Apparently, they were met by local guides, but as no perimeter scouts were allowed to escort the refugees, I do not know whether these were even true men. We will pursue, of course, but there is a smell about this that I do not like. I am certain at least one free magic sorcerer is involved on our side of the wall, and the crossing point the Sutherlings used is the one closest to where you were ambushed. So that's upsetting. And then, like, later on, when he gets the letter from Nick, there is an echo of this sort of thing in there. And we will talk about that. So his parents come home, and he is really excited to see them. And Touchstone looks absolutely exhausted, and his mother is not with him. The injury that she sustained in a fight was so bad that she has to stay in the, like, underchamber of the castle where the Charterstone is and use it to heal herself because it nearly killed her. It came really, really close. And his father comments on the fact that, like, Sam has not written to him very often. And Sam thinks about the fact that, like, it's because I burned most of them that I wrote. And he's about to try and explain to his father what he's been going through with, like, not being able to open that book. And his sister interrupts, and that makes Sam, like, kind of clam up. And they go down into the reservoir in order to see her. And, you know, his father tries to say she wasn't wounded seriously, but he's full of shit. Like, when they talk to her later, it's 100% serious and almost fatal. And it says, let's see, wouldn't it be better to have the conference up here after Mother's cast her spell? No, replied Touchstone, who had much more reason than his son to fear the place. It's the only place we will definitely not be overheard, and there are too many things you must both know, and no others should. And bring the wine, Sameth, we'll need it. So he goes and brings the wine. He forgets to bring the cups, which he gets so mad at himself for later on. And they go down into this, like, real creepy reservoir, and it's one of those things that's so unfortunate that it is a place that's, like, safe for them to talk and yet so forbidding and uncomfortable to be. Sam dipped his hand in the water as he helped his father untie the barge. As the water trickled between his fingers, he saw charter marks sparkle briefly. All the water in the reservoir absorbed magic from the great Charterstones. Closer to the center, the water was almost more magic than anything else and was no longer cold or even wet. That's bananas. What is that like? Like, what? So they sailed out, or I guess, do you say sail? If you are not, like, using a sail? But anyway, they go out there, and he's thinking about the Charterstones and how they were broken by Caragor with the sacrifices and everything. And he's thinking about the, like, charter magic and how it works and how little he really knows about it. So let's see. The barge passed between two columns, and Sam's eyes adjusted to the strange twilight. And there is a moment that I don't know how to interpret this. He can't see his mother for a moment, and it says fear gripped hard at his chest. He couldn't see his mother. All he could think of was how the dead Caragor had taken on his former human shape and lured Sam's grandmother, the queen, down to a dark and bloody death. Maybe Touchstone wasn't really Touchstone, but something else that had assumed his form. Something moved on the barge ahead. Sam, who had unconsciously held his breath, gasped and choked, thinking that all his fears were realized. Whatever it was had no human shape, rising only as high as his waist, without arms or head or discernible form, a lump of writhing darkness where his mother should be. Then Touchstone slapped him on the back. He took a sudden breath, and the thing on the barge cast a small charter light that sparkled in the air above like a tiny star. So he kind of has like almost a panic attack a little bit in response to the idea that something has like taken him. It is tough, man. And when they finally come across his mom, she looks super exhausted. She has white streaks in her hair and, just looks like she has aged a lot in a very short amount of time. And Sam realizes suddenly that she's going to get old. Like, there is that period in your life when you're young where your parent seems to be the same age the whole time. And I have recently reached a point in my life where my mother has started aging in the past 5 years to a degree that it's noticeable when I see her that she has aged. And it is very, upsetting to be reminded of her mortality in that way. So yeah, that's kind of what he's getting here, is being reminded, hey, she may not die in battle, but she'll definitely die. So, just be ready for that. And they start talking, and I have so little time left. Oh, I need to speed this along. She doesn't want them to see the wound because it's that kind of bad. She says, I almost got myself killed. I don't understand it myself. And she starts telling them about everything that's been going on and how bad it's been out there because something is gathering power. General Tyndall believes that Corellini and his Our Country party are being funded with Old Kingdom gold, though he cannot definitively prove it. Since Corellini and his party now hold the balance of power in the Ancestir Moot, they've been able to get the Sutherlings moved farther and farther north. They have also made it clear that their ultimate aim is to get all the Sutherling refugees moved across the wall into our kingdom. The reasons they make public in Ancestir are populist rubbish, pandering to the fears of the common folk. But there has to be a reason why someone here is supplying them with gold, enough gold to buy the 12 seats they've picked up in the moot. I fear that reason may have something to do with the fact that we have not been able to find more than a score of the 1,000 people who were sent across a month ago, and none of that score alive. The rest have simply vanished. And Elamir is like, how do that many people just disappear? What? And Touchstone is like, yeah, exactly. That's the problem. And they... Oh, Laura has to leave. Bye, Laura. Thank you for coming. So they cast a spell to make sure they're not overheard. And at this point, Sabriel says, your father and I are certain the Sutherlings were brought across the wall to be killed, slain by a necromancer who has used the bodies to house dead spirits who owe him allegiance. Only free magic sorcery can explain how the bodies and all other traces have disappeared, unseen by our patrols or the Clare's sight. And when Elamir is like, I thought the Clares be able to see, Sabriel has to be like, there has been something going on where they can't see lately. And Elamir is basically like, why don't we get some, basically police to deal with this? And Sabriel's like, we don't know where it is, and we don't know what it is. If we just send people at it, likely it'll be able to just kill whoever we send, and then it's just swelling the ranks. And she thought that they had dealt with what this is 5 years or so ago with the Clore of the Mask, and we met her in the prologue. She was very old and powerful, so I had presumed she was the architect of our difficulties there, but now I'm not sure. And we know that Clore was taken over, not taken, that implies that she was possessed, but she gave her allegiance to that dude. So they thought that she was the mastermind, but we know that was not the case. And one possibility is the man you encountered in death, Sam. So I appreciate that they're figuring this out. And I wish so much that they would see what's going on with him and how tough this is for him. He must have great power to raise so many dead hands on the other side of the wall. And with that power, I should have heard of him, but I have not. How has he kept himself hidden all these years? How did Clore hide when we scoured the kingdom, and why did she reveal herself to attack Robles Town? I'm wondering if I underestimated her. And she says that she like walked Clore into death, but she didn't follow her all the way in. And she was like, she's thinking now, maybe I should have, because there is certainly something about her that feels strange. Like she could have turned around and come back out again. So yeah, she's just like thinking that this necromancer that they're dealing with might be ancient enough that it's something that somebody that they have come across, like, you know, thousands of years ago, potentially. I should like to look there. And she says, too much knowledge was destroyed when the palace burnt, and more has been lost besides. And the Clare, while they keep everything in that great library, rarely find anything useful in it. Their minds are too much bent upon the future. So again, you know, Lirael is so frequently like, I wish I was a Clare, but like, she could present a totally better perspective because she's not just focused on the future. So, you know, we think they plan to bring all 200,000 Sutherling refugees into the Old Kingdom and kill them. 200,000 deaths in a single poisoned minute to make an avenue out of death for every spirit that has lingered there from the first precinct to the very precipice of the ninth gate. To summon a host of the dead greater than any that has ever walked in life. A host that we could not possibly defeat, even if all the Abhorsens who have ever lived were somehow to stand against them. And that's the end of that chapter. And I was just like, are you serious? And the beginning of the next chapter, there's just dead silence and everybody's like, what? And Touchstone's quickly going, of course that's not going to happen. And I'm like, Touchstone, you need to stop, buddy. You need to stop, because we all know you don't know shit and you're just trying to make them feel better. And it's like not helping. So just, dude, let them sit with this for a second. So she gives Sam a bell, or I think she gives a whole set of bells, right? I found these at the house. I don't know where they found them or why they got them out now, and they're very old. But yeah, she like says, I would have asked Mogget, but he still sleeps. And I'm just like, aw, Mogget, I miss you, buddy. What's up? So yeah, he's apparently asleep and like only wakes up very, very occasionally. And Sam is like, you know, trying to be grateful because of this bond with his mother of being an Abhorsen. But of course, this is like everything he fears and hates and does not want to be dealing with. And she tells him that she will need his help. And he's like really determined in that moment to try his best because he knows it, like everybody's depending on him. And the most he can say is just that he's not ready. And she essentially brushes that off because she's like, you'll get there. Like, I didn't think I was ready either. So, you know, she says, use them only when you are confident you have learned the lessons in the book. Do you promise? And he says yes. And he's kind of grateful to have that to sort of like fall back on. And there's the theory that it's Caragor. They like are able to dispel that notion pretty easily. And they drink some wine to try and warm up and make themselves feel a little bit better. And then they go up, and Sabriel has to stay down there in order to continue her leg healing. And then Sam gets, I forgot, chapter 26 is included here, my bad. Sam gets that letter from Nick, and it's really suspicious. Like, the whole thing is basically about how, like, he had to pull strings to get across, and that he hired a guide who just happened to be there, but really, like, knew where to go and how fortuitous it was, and yada, yada, yada. And it's obviously, like, somebody who is either specifically being sent to collect him, or somebody who is sent to just collect fucking pigeons. So I don't, like, I had been wondering whether Nicholas remembered what had happened to him and was just lying because he was being controlled by that guy, or genuinely forgot. And based on this letter, I really think that he actually just forgot, because I don't think he'd have shared all of this if he were being controlled. This is too revealing, you know, unless it's meant to be a setup to lure Sam to his rescue. So who knows? We'll see. And he says something about how he's been having chest pains. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you have. There's a fucking sliver in you. Like, who knows what the fuck? And Sam finally decides that he is going to, like, go down and meet him and try and keep him from trouble, essentially. And Sam has a little bit of a heart-to-heart with Elamir. I'm way over time. I really need to wrap up. But they just talk about being worried about their mother and the fact that they are both, you know, concerned and not really sure what they can do. And Elamir seems to be almost a little bit jealous because Sam is able to directly help while she has to kind of do what she can from here. And everyone depended on him. And so suddenly he realized Nicholas. He had to go and find Nicholas to save his friend before he got into trouble. And that makes him feel a little bit better because he has some purpose now. And even as he starts to get ready to head out, there's a voice in him that's just kind of like, yeah, you're just sort of using this as an excuse to, like, avoid doing what you need to do. But on the other hand, like, he obviously is not quite capable at this time of doing what he needs to do. So maybe he needs this, you know? So I'm not mad at him. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, okay, I got a wrap. I went over time way far. Thank you very much, Abby, for commissioning this episode. And thank you for being in the chat as well. And thank you to Laura also for hanging out with us. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.